I'm excited. It's my first time on your radio show.
Thanks, Terry. I had this speaker when he called me in 2008, and he said, "Hey, I'm Kevin McCarthy from California. I want to campaign for you." And I said, "Nobody's ever heard of Kevin McCarthy." And I'll never forget driving and him learning about dry counties versus wet counties when we were driving through. And we took him to Abraham Lincoln's birthplace. So anyway, I know you want to talk to him, so we'll he's been a few times in my district. We're good friends, and so...
Well,
proud to have him.
I had no idea. I appreciate the connection here. Obviously, Speaker, the inquiry and the impeachment inquiry, of course, is all over the news everywhere. So we know we've been hearing about it. Kentucky's James Comer, of course, has been collecting the evidence. We know he has 12,000 pages of subpoenaed bank records and 2,000 pages more of suspicious activity reports. But what bit of authenticated evidence pushed you to officially launch this inquiry this week?
Well, you know the work that Jamie Comer has been doing. The part that has been, and we've been back in the district for the last month and a half. You've watched where the president told everyone that he had nothing to do with his son's business. Since that time, we found, no, he made the phone calls, he did the dinners where the son got new Porsches, got millions of dollars. The family set up 20 shell companies that got more than 20 million. We now know that he used fake names in emails where he talked about Ukraine. We now have a staffer who worked there who tells Hunter Biden's business partner that the vice president has signed off on the Burisma talking points. There are just too many questions. You got an FBI informant who says, went to the FBI a number of years ago, that the FBI uses, that he is going to, that he knows there's a bribe, and they won't find it because of these shell companies, which we never knew of. Too many questions that we need answers to, and that's exactly what impeachment inquiry is. It goes in and looks at and gives the Congress power for their subpoenas. So as Jamie goes through and looks for the bank statements, the credit card statements, and others, we'll know where the facts are and be able to answer these questions.
Well, your counterpart in the House, the Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, said, quote, "Republicans have launched an illegitimate impeachment inquiry that is a kangaroo court, a fishing expedition, and conspiracy theater rolled into one." So my question is do you have solid evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors, or is this just a deeper dive to try and find those?
Well, the difference between an impeachment inquiry is impeachment inquiry gives the Congress the power why the administration fights us to provide documents. Think about the benefit the Bidens have when they just waste time. If you're being investigated by the IRS never lets the statute of limitation runs out. The federal government actually did that for Hunter Biden. So in our quest, we need these documents to answer these questions. The American public wants to know, so that's all that it's providing us to do.
It gives you further reach.
Yes.
Essentially. All right. Now, obviously, people are pointing out that there was no House vote on this, and earlier, years ago, you were upset about Nancy Pelosi's doing the same thing. Is this like the Harry Reid nuclear option that they broke a certain protocol, and so now you're saying it's fair game?
Well, this is how they changed so much in the House, that new president. So it makes the same point that we did. This is how they set the House to go forward. We'll go set the House to go forward the same way.
Okay, clearly you're getting a lot of pressure from the ultra-conservative right, Matt Gaetz and others. He's talking about ways to try and get you removed from your seat, and people are wondering if this impeachment inquiry is just something to appease that part of the Republican faction.
Hey, Terry, this is Brett.
Yeah.
I'm for this. I think we should move forward on this. And Jamie Comer, I know he does your show, and a lot of people in his district listen to this. I've seen him walk through all the information that we know. I mean, we know that, first of all, it wasn't Hunter Biden's laptop. That's what the White House was saying, and we know that it was. We know that President Biden engaged in business discussions with his business associates, all these things that are false. So the reason I'm for it is not that Matt Gaetz is for it. I'm for it is because most of the stuff we have found is by subpoena and bank records. Now, we do know that Hunter Biden's emails talked about spending his money on his father. So they keep saying you don't have anything where President Biden personally profited from helping his son get this money, but we do know their emails. And so what we need to look at is the other records that come from the Bidens, which would be credit card records, where did the money go for? And the only way you're going to get that if a court orders it, because they're certainly not going to provide it, even if it's a legitimate congressional issue. And by doing my view, coming around to this, doing the impeachment inquiry gives us standing in court to make sure we get there. I think the American people want to know if Hunter Biden's emails to his daughter to say, I will never treat you like my father's treated me, mandating I give you half of my salary. We know those exist. We just have to have proof to where the money went. And I think it's absolutely legitimate to move forward. And so I don't necessarily run in the circles of people you just mentioned, and I'm for it.
The Speaker McCarthy, what is your response, though, to those temperamental teammates on the Republican team that are pressuring you about budget dealings and the funding of government?
Well, Matt Gaetz isn't pressuring about that. Matt Gaetz is working with Eric Swalwell. It's about an ethics complaint that Matt has had against him for a couple of Congresses, and he wants me to try to influence the ethics committee. I will never do that. That is a independent body that holds everybody accountable, and I will never put Eric Swalwell back on the Intel committee. So, I mean, if they want to utilize that to try to remove people from Speaker, having Eric Swalwell with the Chinese spy and Matt Gaetz because he has an ethics complaint, I just think this office is too big to play with those type of games.
Right.
And I never take impeachment lightly. I'm just following the evidence of where it's at, and I just think there's too many questions out there. You've got to get an answer. So it was no pressure by Matt. Matt is trying to pressure me to do something to help him beneficially because he's got an ethics complaint against himself.
Right. He talked about the agreement in January when you obviously went through all those different votes to finally get the chair. But are you legally bound to the demands of these ultra-conservatives by some agreement you made with them in January?
Well, I don't know what agreement Matt's talking about because Matt never even voted for me. Matt just fought me the whole time. The only thing that was out there is that we changed from having 5 people to make a motion to vacate the chair to 1. And so Matt's trying to utilize that to remove me with Eric Swalwell.
And think about it, Thomas Massey's now on the Rules Committee, and I know he's also in your listening area, and how effective he has made himself by getting on the Rules Committee. And so I would say you got Comer, you got Andy Barr's on the Chinese Committee. I'm Chair of Health Committee. Hal's the Dean, who's a mentor to Kevin. So I think we have a lot of people here that work with Kevin to get things done.
Obviously, there's a presidential election next year. Some people think this is a revenge move to counter the Democrats' multi-layered legal pursuits of President Trump. And I'm sure I know what your answer is on that. You already said this is a serious matter. But what's the timeline? What are you seeing on this impeachment inquiry in terms of how it rotates with the calendar page flips toward the next election?
Well, I don't think this is about elections or anything else. This is about integrity. You want to make sure that your public officials aren't for hire. You want to make sure that you could get the answers. If your president lied to you and utilized the office and withheld $1 billion of American taxpayer money to remove a prosecutor in Ukraine because the prosecutor was going after a company that his son was on the board of, wouldn't you want to know about that? And I just think from that part, it's important that America knows the answers, because every point that the president has made, he's had to backtrack on his comments.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty alarming bit of video. We've all seen that one a zillion times. So you don't know how long this inquiry may go. It's open-ended.
No, because the one thing I've learned from this administration, they fight us every time we want to get information. That's why you had to go to impeachment inquiry. And this will only help us when we get into court, that we'll have strength to be able to get the documents that we need.
Mr. Speaker, obviously there's other congressional business pounding at your door there, funding the Department of Defense, the Farm Bill, Ukraine aid, disaster relief, the budget itself. What's the outlook for completion on these various projects?
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I was just talking to him as you were asking the question, Terry. We talked this morning, the Speaker had a group of us, the caucus this morning, talked about border security with a continuing resolution. And I think that's extremely important. I think the American people, when I was home in August, talked about just the fact that we have complete lack of control at the border, fentanyl coming across the border. And so we talked about tying that to this moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got a number of funding bills we've got to get through. We know we got to open border. I think this is an opportunity. But when you look at all the work that the House has been able to do about securing the border, Parents' Bill of Rights, cutting back on the runaway spending here in Washington, making members actually show up for work. We got to get this work all done before the 30th. I think we'll be able to get there. You think
it's all going to get done? And getting people back to work is important. You mean have them on the premises?
Yes, sir.
All right, let me ask you about a couple of other things. Kim Jong-un just met with Vladimir Putin, pledging help with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Why is the United States mired in another seemingly endless conflict? What do you see in terms of our out strategy?
You know, this brings me real concern because it looks like the 30s where you got these axis of power moving together, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. It's very concerning to me for what the world will look like in that situation. I think from another predicament, we've got to make sure how this moves forward. Putin has invaded Ukraine. We got to be able to stand there. But the one thing is you don't want this new axis of power to grow. They all want to expand their sphere of influence.
Yeah, they're unsettling images coming out of Moscow, that's for sure, of seeing these guys. And inflation, obviously, we can talk about impeachment and all the other things that happen, but basically, Americans go to the grocery store and they can't believe what they're getting for $100. What remedies do we have at hand here by the Congress at large to try and ease inflation?
Well, that's a great question. As you know, inflation has grown when government spends too much, and when the Democrats were in the majority, they added that $6 trillion that brought us inflation. We warned it about it, and the president told us it was just only temporary. We found that it was not, and it's really harmed that America for the third year in a row. You actually have less money today because what inflation has been eating out of all the families from what they can spend. We've been able to cap in our last bill for debt ceiling on how much government can spend. That was a big victory in the part. You got to help supply chain, got to get people back to work. You got to incentivize people get into the workforce. We've got work requirements coming forward to help people get back into the workforce, and that was a big victory as well. So I think you're going to start seeing a turn and get a little better economy here since the Republicans took the majority.
Last thing for both of you guys, the UAW is talking about a strike with the big three by midnight tomorrow. We don't really know what will happen from that. We have 2 Ford plants here in Louisville, Speaker McCarthy, that would probably go dark. Can you or the leadership offer any help to avert this strike?
You know, we stepped in. I didn't, but the president stepped in with the railroad strike and came up with a big settlement for the railroad. So it's set up. You saw what happened with the UPS, which is in our area as well. You see what's going on with the UAW. You know, this really needs to be between, my view of it, needs to be between the automotive maker and their employees. I follow the automotive industry pretty closely. I believe Ford, and I know Ford particularly, but the others have also offered good packages. We want our workers in Louisville and other Ford plants and General Motors in my district as well. I've taken Kevin to the Corvette plant, and he actually saw where the Corvettes had fallen into the earth, the collapse. And we don't want that to happen in our automotive industry. It's really moving again. We just came out of the chips. And so hopefully our employees and the unions will look at the deal. If they don't think it's right for them, they need to do what they need to do. But it seemed like a pretty strong offer. And what we're just coming out of the COVID, out of the chip crisis, and now there are vehicles on dealers' floors for people to buy. Hopefully we can continue that momentum going forward. But when the federal government sets the precedent of engaging and helping one side or the other, I think everybody wants that assistance. And I think it needs to be between the employers and the employees, and hopefully it'll be fair and people will get a fair wage and be able to raise their family with a good living. And I think Ford in your area, General Motors, there's Ford people in my district, I know, but the plants are actually in Morgan McGarvey's. But in General Motors, I think people will, they offer a good living and people make a good living, and hopefully we can keep those open. It'll hurt the economy to not do it, that's for sure.
All right. Congressman Guthrie, appreciate that. Speaker McCarthy, thanks so much for your time today, too.